So welcome everybody to the Stewart Air National Guard Base Restoration Advisory Committee meeting. This is our fourth meeting in October of 2020. I know there's still a lot of people logging in, but we have a packed agenda tonight, and so I want to go ahead and get things started. Next slide, please. So I would like to start off with a few of our introductions, and then we will roll into our opening comments. With the National Guard Bureau, we have Robert Subsavage. Keith, I'm sorry, Keith, I'm going to really ruin your last name unless you want to save me. Freihofer and Nicole Wireman, who are with us tonight. From Stewart Air National Guard Base, we have Colonel Mark Kelly, Colonel Edward Cook, Mike Ottinger, and Master Sergeant Sarah Pastorello. Thank you all. From the Corps of Engineers, we have Michelle listed. She's actually not with us tonight, but we have Jessica Fraze, Kinjal Shaw, and Stephen Kitt. And then, of course, our contractors, Burge Weston Services, who I am with, as well as Doug Close, who will be speaking later today, and Carrie Tull from Wood. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Next slide. Our RAC members for this evening. With our community representatives, we have Anthony Fern, Kathy Skylars, John Clark, Ramona Burton, Ora Lopez-Zarat, Cynthia Mack, Carla Johnson, Edward Lawson, Laura Patricia Garcia Belvin, and Robert Sanchez Potter. Thank you guys for joining us and participating as our RAC members. Our community group representatives, Chuck Thomas, our co-chair with the Newburgh Conservation Advisory Council, Jack Caldwell, Passaic Creek Watershed Alliance, Manna Joe Green with Hudson River Sloop Clearwater, Mary Wagner with Newburgh Clean Water Project, and Victoria Lung with Riverkeeper. Our government representatives are Anthony Grice with the City of Newburgh, Keith Miller with Orange County, and Patrick Hines on behalf of the town of New Windsor. And then additionally, I know I saw our Justin Starr with New York DEC, and I know we have a number of other representatives with us this evening, including the representative from Senator Schumer's office. Next slide. So here is our agenda for this evening, and I'll leave that up as we start off with our opening comments and our welcome with Colonel Kelly and Chuck Thomas. Colonel Kelly?
Thanks, Heather. Thank you for everyone for signing in. I think we're up to 73 people. And it's great that we can continue our momentum in this format. I know we would all rather be in person, but until COVID subsides and we can get back to meeting in large groups, we'll have to continue to do it this way. So I appreciate everyone's patience. I know everyone in the community and in the government would rather be face-to-face. So thanks for your patience. And then I also wanted to introduce Colonel Ed Cook. So I've had the pleasure of being in this role for about 1.5 years now, and it is my turn to move on. And Colonel Donald, our wing commander, has appointed Colonel Cook to sort of take over as the senior representative for Stewart Air National Guard Base. I've certainly enjoyed my 1.5 years in this role. I've gotten to know a lot of people. And I want to say thanks to all of the Guard Bureau team, the contractors, subcontractors, and the community leaders. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. I'll still be in the background and still probably get a lot of emails, but from this point on, Colonel Cook is going to assume my role. So Ed, do you want to say a few comments?
First of all, I'd like to thank Colonel Kelly publicly for all of his work over the last 1.5 years. I have been actively shadowing him for the last year since I arrived at Stewart. Actually before the first RAC meeting last fall, and I look forward to working with everyone virtually to continue to move this forward, and also to get everyone on base as soon as the COVID risk subsides. We hope to do that in the near future. not only getting our community members on base, but getting our families back on base would be a great benefit to all of us. So I look forward to working with you, and we'll talk soon. Thank you.
I'm going to have issues with my microphone tonight. So thank you, Colonel Cook. And now I'd like to turn it over to Chuck Thomas.
Thank you very much. Mark, I'm going to miss you already. And Colonel Cook, we welcome you. Glad to have you aboard. I just have a brief few words to say here. When we initiated the RAC process for the SANG and the City of Newburgh residents and stakeholders to collaborate on an investigative and restorative process, we came in with the goal of securing a comprehensive and timely cleanup for our drinking water reservoir and surrounding watershed that serves over 30,000 people. To this end, I want to thank the RAC members and our partners for this effort over the past year. This is the 4th quarterly meeting of this process and my last meeting also as your community co-chair. Working together, we've created a culture of communication and collaboration and have crafted operating procedures allowing greater participation in both review and public participation. Studies have been undertaken to better understand the sources of contamination and the movement of contaminants through the area. This has begun to demonstrate varied and unexpected sources of pollution, new migration pathways, and further exposures. It's important to recognize and understand. It's also important to recognize the net result is that pollutants are primarily entering our drinking water source, Washington Lake, and our watersheds such as Silver Stream and the Moodna Creek through one venue, the recreation pond. Last winter, a trial filtering system was placed at Rec Pond, and it almost immediately failed due to clogging and the system being overwhelmed by area rainfall. Since that time, there's been no apparent progress towards replacing that failed system with an adequate replacement system. We're now approaching another year without filtering taking place. Why is that? I'm not looking for the answer now, but rather pointing out that this is something that the community really feels need to be addressed. This unfiltered water is blocked from entering Washington Lake, but that does not help the remediation of Washington Lake, which is our ultimate goal. Washington Lake was created back in the 1800s as a robust and active water system for the entire city of Newburgh. It actually predates the New York City water system. Isn't it important to be filtering this water now? New York State will not be able to foot the bill indefinitely for our use of New York City's clean Catskill aqueduct water, which other PFAS communities are now tapping into as well. Meanwhile, we will not allow our community that has already suffered from 3 decades of PFAS poisoning to go back onto Washington Lake, knowing that our current filtration system can't filter out all the PFASs. Furthermore, we want to prevent the continuing degradation of our streams, the Moodna Creek, Silver Stream, among others, that flow into America's River, the Hudson River, which serves as drinking water for 7 other communities. This is not the fault of the good folks in this virtual room, but rather a system that seems to prioritize economics over health and safety. 4 years ago, PFASs were identified in our drinking water. 4 years ago, the New York State DEC identified the problem and recommended solutions. Our cleanup is now being penalized because we are not using Washington Lake as our drinking water source. The priority we have and had is our health and safety. We need to bring our collective and powerful voices to bear to expedite the cleanup process, approve funding for remedial investigations, and move the cleanup forward. The City of Newburgh did not willy-nilly decide to stop using Washington Lake, but rather was forced to stop supplying polluted drinking water to our citizens for their health and safety. Now is the time to immediately raise our collective voices to fund and start remediation of Washington Lake, a water supply system predating the venerable New York City system, and I call on this body to lead that call to action. I thank each and every one of you for your participation, and I look forward to this group moving forward to find a better water system for the City of Newburgh. Thank you.
Chuck.
Welcome.
And I know we'll be hearing more from you a little bit later on. We are going to roll right into our RAC business for tonight. I did want to point out before we move on that I have received word that the representative from Senator Gillibrand's office is also with us this evening, and Wendy from the New York State Department of Health is also with us. I know, along with many other representatives from the town of New Windsor, from Newburgh, and other state agencies. So we thank all of you for joining us this evening and participating in this meeting. Next slide, please. So our meeting notes and guidelines for tonight, we do have a representative here who is transcribing the meeting proceedings. So again, if everyone can try to introduce themselves, remember to introduce yourselves. That way we can have everyone's comments attributed to the person and the organization that you represent if you are speaking. This is generally for our presenters and our RAC members. All phones are muted at this point. This helps us keep the noise level down during the meeting. So we appreciate you working with us on that. If you do have questions, there is a questions module. Please insert your questions there. There will be time at the end of the meeting to discuss or to respond to some of those public questions. And so we will read off those questions and the individuals that they are attributed to at that time. So you can start inserting your questions if you like, or throughout the meeting. Next slide, please. So on to our RAC business. Next slide. Our upcoming meetings are going to be February 3rd. That is a Wednesday. It's offset a little bit due to the holidays. It's 1 week back, but we hope everyone will be able to join us on February 3rd. We would love to say that we will be meeting in person, but I think we've all been monitoring the COVID issue, and it will most likely be a virtual meeting once again, but we will definitely send out the information via the email list that we have for the RAC meetings, as well as place the newspaper advertisements and things like that to let everybody know whether we will have another virtual meeting or if there is the capability of meeting in person. Our 6th meeting will be April 28th, and our 7th meeting is proposed for July 28th with RAC approval. I think we'll be able to keep on our quarterly schedule. So please mark your calendars now for those dates. Next slide. Our operating procedures have been an ongoing discussion for the RAC, and I would just like to thank Chuck, Thomas, Mary Wagner, and Victoria Loon for all their work, as well as all the other RAC members who I know have had comments and taken the time to review the procedures. And I think there has been some really great conversations back and forth with the Air National Guard. And we finally have a set of operating procedures that I think we have finalized as it shows up on our slide. We had meetings to discuss the final comments, and the final comments were received from those RAC members on September 16th, and we've submitted a final copy that I believe has been shared with the entire RAC. And so now, unless there are any comments, and you can raise your hand if there's any additional questions or comments on the operating procedures, I would like to see if we are ready for a vote on those. Chuck?
I would like to move that we accept the operating procedures as written, rewritten, and submitted for comments. Thank you. Any other comments from the RAC members?
And if you raise your hand, we'll make sure you get unmuted. Okay, if not, if all of our RAC members can go ahead, and if you would like to accept the operating procedures, please raise your hand and we will make a record of those to make sure that we do have the majority. You should on your panel have a picture of a little hand that you can use to raise your hand. So I will ask all of the RAC members to do that now. Thank you, Chuck. And it looks like we have the vote from Victoria, Anthony Grice, John Clark, Bill Fetter, Jack Caldwell, Manajo Green, Mary Wagner, Patrick Hines, Laura Garcia, Ora Lopez-Rat. Anybody else? Final moments. I believe that looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like we have 10 members with Chuck. Which looks like the majority. Thank you everyone for raising your hands. Is there anyone that abstains or opposes adopting the operating procedures as they stand? Okay, Victoria, it looks like you are the one that raised your hand in opposition. Or maybe not.
Hi, sorry. I think I clicked the wrong button. So I want to support the operating procedures, and I meant to lower my hand after that initial vote.
Okay, perfect.
And I want
All
to
right,
thank
so
all
I
the
think
RAC members, if I may. There was more than just a few of us that worked on these operating procedures. We had a lot of feedback, and I thank everyone for that.
yes, thank you. And thank you. It looks like we have the majority to go ahead and approve them. We will make sure everyone gets those final copies if you don't have one. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. So we, as Chuck mentioned in his opening comments, we have had a great year working with him as the RAC co-chair for our community members. And we appreciate all of his service. I know he's not leaving us and he'll still be supporting the RAC, and we appreciate that. But his term is over. I believe there was a nomination for Ed Lawson to be the co-chair. Is that correct? Or are there any other nominations for co-chair?
Yes, we've nominated Ed Lawson as the co-chair, and I wonder if there are any other nominations from the floor. Not seeing
Please
any
raise your
hands.
hand. Doesn't look like it. So
Great.
if our RAC members would once again go ahead and raise their hands if they are in support of Ed being co-chair. Hopefully he's in support of being co-chair as well. I'm assuming you've had that conversation with him. So again, it looks like we have Victoria, Anthony, John, Ora, Bill, Jack, Manajo, Mary Wagner, and Patrick, all in support of Ed as our co-chair. Again, that looks like 10 or 11 of us. So thank you. Again, that is a good majority. Thank you everyone for voting. I'll go ahead and lower your hands. Appreciate your participation. I know this is kind of an odd way of going about it. It looks like we also had a nomination, or let me, Laura, I think you're self-muted. Did you have a question or comment that you wanted to make with your hand raised?
No, I'm sorry. I'm also having issues with raising and lowering my hand.
All right. Thank you. So we are good. Were there any nominations for the secretary? Did we need any discussion?
I will just say that Mary Wagner has done a terrific job, and I hope that doesn't scare away other possible nominees, because it's really an important job, and it's everyone every RAC member has the ability to do this, and I do hope someone will step forward and do the secretarial function.
Yes, thank you. I've had some great support as well, and I would welcome any nominees from the floor. And if not now, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll find some. Thank you.
So if anyone would like to volunteer or nominate someone, you can go ahead and raise your hand. If not, please feel free to reach out to Chuck or Ed or myself or Mary and let anyone know if you are interested. And again, Mary has done a wonderful job. Even if that's something that, because it is quite a bit of work, if that's something that possibly two people want to take on together and maybe share some of those responsibilities, I'm sure that's something that can be worked out as well. So if we have no discussion on that, it looks like at this point, please continue to consider that in the next coming weeks, and we can move on to our next topic. So we have 2 open positions as have been announced, I believe, for Cynthia Mack and Anthony Fern. I would like to thank both of you for your service on the RAC. We appreciate the time and dedication that you have committed to serving on the RAC. And I would like to open it up. Chuck, did you have any comments to make about Cynthia and Anthony before we move on to nominations?
Well, Cynthia really gave us a great view of what was happening outside of our current borders and our current areas of interest. And I really appreciate all that she did to bring us forward here. Anthony, too, was a great person for providing scientific insight into the studies that we were reviewing. So I thank both of them. And we had some discussions, and I've asked Mary to present, I think we had 10 candidates, which I'm thrilled about, for the 2 open positions. Really excited that we had so many candidates. Our membership got together and we narrowed it down to, I believe, 4 candidates. And I'm going to ask Mary to speak to those 4 candidates, if she will.
Sure. Thank you to Cynthia and Anthony, and echoing Chuck, it's great to see so many qualified people apply. The 4 candidates that we narrowed down to are Ronald Zarilla from the city of Newburgh. Ronald is a Conservation Advisory Council member and also a co-founder of Outdoor Promise, which connects youth and families to nature and cultivates young environmental leaders. The second person is Robert Browning, long-time town of Newburgh resident, but very involved with the city of Newburgh. He's a former educator, board president of Independent Living, and has served on the Congressman Sean Patrick Maloney's Veterans Committee. So those 2 candidates got the majority of votes. We have 8 people voting, and Heather, I can share our document. And the other 2 candidates are Kevin Phillips. He is from Cornwall and a member of the Beaver Dam Lake Association. And as I understand it, they're also a PFAS affected community. And Ernestine Ballard from the town of Newburgh, who is an employee at Castle Point, the Veterans Hospital. So thank you to you all, and we will be in touch with you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary. And then I'm sorry, somehow I missed the second person that you named.
Sure, Robert Browning.
Okay, thank you. Just so I have that for my records as well. And then Chuck and Mary, did you guys plan to vote this evening, or is the RAC going to get together and let us know the final decision at a later date?
We had a vote among ourselves, and I believe 8 of the members voted in favor of the 2 people who were mentioned, Ronald Zarilla and Robert Browning. We could do that vote if necessary, but we were trying to save time.
Oh, nope, that's perfect. I just wanted to make sure I had all the information I needed. So it looks like you'll be moving forward with those two then as the new RAC members, filling Cynthia's and Anthony's positions.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, if we can move on to the next slide. I did want to go out there and ask, we are ahead of schedule for this topic, which thank you everyone. Thank you Chuck and Mary for organizing everything so that we could move through these topics fairly quickly, which will give us some more time for the rest of our presentations. I know the community RAC group is going to have a presentation a little bit later tonight. Was there any other RAC business that needed to be discussed before we move on to our presentations?
No
Anyone
other,
wants to raise their hand?
no other business has come to my attention.
All
Just a quick note, if together we can work to find out a way to get at least Spanish captioning or or interpretation for 2021. I have high hopes as 50% of our community is Spanish speaking. So wanted to put that on so that we can all brainstorm. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We will definitely take note of that. Before we move on, I did want to point out to everybody, there are some handouts. You should be able to see them in the bar where your audio controls and question module is located. Tonight's handout, we have the slides from tonight's presentation, our agenda. There's also a document called RAC Terms and Abbreviations. This has a lot of the acronyms that are used as well as a short glossary. We're trying not to use as many acronyms in our presentation, but in case we do, in case something slips by you, or it's also just something, a handy reference for sometimes the documents if you're going to the AR that you can look at. So please take time to look at those handouts. You can download them. So that information is available under your handouts. Next slide, please. So we will start off on our next topics a little bit early. Again, thank you for helping us get through those presentations. Nicole, I think you are first up.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather, and everybody else for working through that so quickly. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here, sincerely taking your time to come and learn more about the environmental projects happening at Stewart and really opening up the discussion on it. We appreciate the time you all commit to this. Again, my name is Nicole Wireman, and I serve as the Restoration Program Manager for Stewart. And I can't go on without saying, though, how pleased we are with the progress that we've made, the positive steps when we look back to our first official RAC meeting in February, and the fact that, you know, through a lot of hard work, we got through some operating procedures that I think have a lot of common interest. It took a lot of coordination, a lot of long phone calls, as Chuck and Mary and Victoria can attest to, but some compromise on both sides. And it's just really great to see us have final operating procedures tonight that we can use going forward. I also wanted to welcome our two newest RAC members this evening, as well as our new RAC co-chair. Really appreciate the time that you all commit to volunteering for this. On top of that, we have great news to share on, and we can go to the next slide now, please. We have great news to share in that since our last meeting, we now have a final expanded site inspection report, or expanded SI report. So if you remember at our last meeting, we were at the draft final stage. We submitted the draft final report in mid-June with the comment period ending in mid-July. And so since the last meeting at the end of July, the Air National Guard prepared responses to the comments that we received from stakeholders. We submitted those responses back to everybody in late August and posted them also to our online administrative record, or AR. And you can see at the top of this slide, there's a link that gets you to our online AR. Then we coordinated further with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC, and we were able to work through the comments and get to a point where on September 22nd, we received a letter from DEC indicating that they had no further comments on the report and we should proceed forward to the remedial investigation, or RI. So that's a big step for us to complete the site inspection phase and be able to proceed forward into the RI phase. We then put that final expanded SI report on our online AR to make it accessible to everybody. That was done at the end of September. And we're displaying for you here the AR numbers where you can access that report. Unfortunately, there are 33 files because it's a big report with a lot of data in it. But the main file that will likely be of interest to you is the very first one, because that includes the body of the text of the report, the figures, and the tables. And then the other 32 files contain all the appendices. So I would particularly point out to you Appendix P, the very last appendix, because that includes also all of the stakeholder comments we responded to, which caused changes to the report from the draft final to the final stage. So if you have any questions about how comments were addressed, we encourage you in particular to look at Appendix P. So this evening, we are not going to be giving a presentation on the expanded SI, and that's because at our last two RAC meetings in April and July, we broke up the information and presented that to you during that time, and there really hasn't been significant changes in getting to the final report. So if you were not at the last RAC meeting perhaps and wanted to access the information on the expanded SI, we do have the slides from the last meeting as a download through this GoToWebinar forum. It's one of the 5 items you can download. And then, of course, a way to access all the materials from the last meeting is to go again to our online AR. And we do that after every quarterly meeting. When everything gets finalized, you'll see the AR number there for the July RAC materials. And that includes the agenda, the slides, the transcripts in both English and Spanish, as well as answers, written answers to any questions that we couldn't get to during the meeting. There's really a lot of valuable information in there that we encourage you to check out our online AR, and you may be able to get some of your questions answered just by looking through some of that material as well. So we had planned to go directly to presenting on our former base landfill and the long-term monitoring program going on there. That would be at Site 3, as well as giving you a great update on our interim stormwater treatment system. But I did want to cover one topic before we did that. And if we could go to the next slide. This is actually a new slide that we inserted because there was a recent news article last week, and we wanted to address that right up front. So first off, I wanted to state, as far as coming from the expanded SI, we will be going into the remedial investigation. That's the next step in the CERCLA process. And again, that's CERCLA's Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. And so we'll be proceeding based on the data from the expanded SI and the 2 SIs. We will be planning to proceed to an RI. The way that will happen is that the Air National Guard is actively sequencing installations for RIs using scientific data and a risk-driven process. So essentially, we look at worst first among the installations. And we do this in conjunction with Air Force sites as well as Air National Guard sites. So related to this, there was a news article which indicated that the community around Stewart would be penalized because of the switch to an alternate drinking water source in 2016. And I just wanted to make very clear that that is not accurate. and it's contrary to the official position of ANG. So we do not penalize local or state officials for finding a new drinking water source. And in fact, we applaud the efforts that were made to find that alternate drinking water source in 2016, and then also to install a filtration system at Lake Washington in 2018, which treats PFAS and PFOA in drinking water to acceptable levels. So in proceeding forward to the RI, the steps that we take are using one part of it at least is to use a risk-based process for decision making that is called Relative Risk Site Evaluation, or RRSE. And during that process, we do not account for the short-term mitigation of risk that results from changing a drinking water source. So RRSE considers the original drinking water source in the migration pathway and receptor analysis. So because of that, the RRSE for Stewart, and then subsequently the sequencing of the Stewart RI, would not be impacted by the fact that an alternate drinking water source is currently being used by the community surrounding Newburgh. So there might be some further questions on that, which we can discuss during the general Q&A period, but I did want to make sure we covered this topic right up front because of that recent news article. And now what I'd like to do is stick with our original agenda and move to our Site 3 presentation, so we can go to the next slide. And that presentation is going to be provided by Mr. Kerry Tull from Wood. So Kerry, you can take over at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And let's make sure I put my, okay, good. All right, I'm there. Good evening, everyone. Again, Kerry Tull with Wood Engineering, and this is for Site 3, also previously known as Site 1. This is the former base landfill. This has been a long-term monitoring program that's gone on for a couple of decades and more. Let me go to next slide, please. So as the arrow indicates, this is on the easternmost side of of the base. The landfill received municipal domestic waste from former on-site Air Force residents during the 60s and 70s. The landfill was covered, the landfill cover cap was installed in 1999, and annual long-term monitoring has gone on since 2000. 2020 represents the 21st year that long-term monitoring has been performed. Next slide. As a background, the final work plan for the long-term monitoring to go on between 2020 and 2024 was submitted to the New York State DEC in February of 2020. Annual sampling event completed week of April in 2020. This had to be conducted in the very midst of the beginning of the COVID issues, so it took some extra effort, but everyone was able to rally, and the base was very accommodating. So groundwater samples were collected from 7 wells. Surface water and sediment sampling was collected, and landfill gas monitoring along the landfill perimeter. It's important to remember, as this has come up as a theme, that the landfill has a cap and has about a dozen or so large vents. So it regularly it has the ability to off gas if some gases that typically accumulate from typical domestic waste do collect. It's able to off gas those through those vents. It was designed in. Next slide. So this slide shows the perimeter and sampling points all around. The wells, most importantly, on the down gradient side will be to the east, to the right-hand side, and we also have wells up gradient as a comparison. The cap is represented by that clear grassy area right along the center there, running north and south. We go to the next slide. So updates since the last RAC meeting. The 2020 annual long-term monitoring report. The draft final report was submitted to New York State DEC and the RAC on the 29th of September. We've received some comments and we've been addressing those. The findings were basically low levels of solid waste related chemicals detected in groundwater. Most chemicals show stable or decreasing concentration trends. Next slide. Findings. Several solid waste related chemicals show variable or increasing trends over time. For example, chloride, which is a salt, sodium, salt, iron, and solvent breakdown products. Specifically, the solvent breakdown products are chlorinated solvents, typical of a landfill of this type. They are going to break down in an anaerobic state, and the amount of oxygen that's in any given landfill after it's been capped and sitting for decades, the amount of oxygen is very low, and you have what is considered an anaerobic condition. This actually helps break down chlorinated solvents, and the degradation products of those solvents we're seeing, which are typically DCE and vinyl chloride. Those will continue to be monitored both around and off of the landfill itself. No solid waste related chemicals are present above the New York State DEC criteria in the most down gradient well, MW19, or in surface water and sediment samples. It's important to remember that the groundwater that travels through or comes out of the landfill is going to display itself in the nearby surface water receptors, and we're not seeing, or the samples that we've taken have not displayed any contaminants above those criteria thus far. You could, next slide. So again, we've got locations where we have seen some exceedances, and those are, it's kind of difficult to say, kind of difficult to see, sorry, but as you can see there in the center, they're highlighted in blue. We've got some vinyl chloride in that well, I believe it's 16, and then just on the toe, the bottom part of that, you can see we've got some vinyl chloride and some DCE. Again, these are long-term, expected, anticipated breakdown products from solvents. It's part of the dechlorination process. Next slide. So, continuing with findings. Nominal levels of landfill gas were detected at the perimeter sampling stations, indicating low or no levels of biological activity. Positive information, because high levels of biological activity can result in the need for gas treatment and or the generation of elevated chemical concentrations in leachate. The sum total of this wording is that the landfill is acting and is in a state in which we would expect it to be. There's nothing about the landfill that is unanticipated or projecting a problem that would be a call to action. We monitor, again, this is being monitored over a long period of time, has been and will continue to be. Next. And that's it. So I can certainly field any questions for the next 5 minutes.
Heather, we can't hear you.
That darn mute button again, it's going to get me every time. So thank you, Carrie, for your presentation. I think our first question is coming in from Mary Wagner, and then I will ask any other RAC members who have a question on the Site 3 presentation that Carrie gave, please raise your hand and we'll try to get as many questions in 5 minutes that we can. Mary, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sorry, Carrie, I think you already answered it mostly. What is the, if you could just speak to the toxicity associated with the vinyl chloride and DEC?
Yes, so vinyl chloride and DEC are solvents. You do not want elevated concentrations of those. The important point is while they have been detected down gradient of the landfill at concentrations that exceed the New York State DEC guidance, we're not seeing them beyond that. This is not a plume that's expanding. Those types of results are typical of previous sampling rounds and are not indicating a trend that is worrisome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from our RAC members on Site 3? I'm not seeing any hands up. Oh, Victoria, I see you. I think you can unmute yourself.
Great, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Perfect. So you mentioned the down gradient wells, and in the report, it seems that there's detection of 1 to DCE and final chloride in some down gradient wells where it wasn't seen before. And I know the report mentions that this is something Wood will be monitoring further, but I was wondering if you would be, how exactly you would be doing that. Will you be increasing frequency, and how will you determine if any additional monitoring is required for that?
Thanks. That's a great question. At this time, again, working with the state, the Solid Waste Department, the New York State DEC, this landfill, because of its age, is sampled only on an annual basis. But to your point, if those trends continue, if more importantly, if we were to see a trend increasing concentration, or find that in the sediment and or surface water beyond, then clearly there's starting to create an indication that this may be more than what we would want or expect, and plans and actions will be taken. At this time, though, the relatively minor amounts, however above the guidance, are just that, are expected to be seen and will be checked annually before any action or plans for that are taken.
Thanks. And one additional, oh, sorry.
That's all right, Victoria. I was just going to add that, of course, we will continue to brief the RAC. The next time we sample in April and have a report, we will share the draft final report for stakeholder and RAC review and do another presentation at that time. So you would hear about the results.
Perfect, thanks. And then I was wondering, which are the sentinel wells for the plume? The ones outside the extent of the plume?
Right. So I would, the ones that specifically called sentinel, I would call all of them sentinel, really. I think that can be a phrase that's it maybe over identifies one or two of the wells, but the wells are looked at, the wells are viewed, the sample results from the wells are looked at in their entirety. So not just the sentinel wells, although that's important, but the wells that extend from the borders outward, as well as the sediment and surface water, all viewed in its entirety.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
Heather,
Okay, and then
are there any more questions, Heather, or is there a time for me to say one more thing?
it looks like there is one question from Chuck. If Chuck wants to go ahead and ask his question.
Thank you. I don't seem to have a raise my hand function, so I thought I'd just put it in there. So what we're saying is that Site 3, the former landfill, is not contributing PFASs, or other negative products to our water supply?
That's correct.
Okay, so we've ruled that one out. Thank you.
Correct.
Hi, this is Bill Fetter. Can I speak? Hello?
Yes. Hi, Bill.
I've been-
We can probably have time for one more quick question and Nicole to wrap up. We're kind of at our 5 minutes.
Okay. A lot of the leachate is based on the amount of flow, rainfall that is passing over the property. Is that not correct?
That's
And
not
it's-
correct. The landfill it has a cap on it. It doesn't receive rainfall.
But, and there's a cutoff trench at the top end to prevent any migration of surface water flow under the top edge?
No, it is not. The landfill is not isolated in that
Okay.
sense. No,
As
it's
well,
not.
it's on a hillside and likely in a wet area towards the base.
It's not in a wet area. It's up on a hillside. It's quite elevated.
Okay.
And yeah.
All right. Okay. And one last question: were the tanks removed from the pesticides that were dumped? There was a
So
cleanup?
the pesticide area was excavated fully about 30 years ago. It was completely delineated, excavated, and post-excavation samples were collected. The pesticide area is no more.
And 20 years later, we're still looking at it.
Well, it's always part of the monitoring program, but the area in which pesticides were dumped was removed.
No, I mean, it's still present though in some of the wells.
Yes.
We can
may
move
show
on.
up
I'll talk to you later more about this.
All right, thanks, Bill. And then Nicole, if you had a final comment.
Yeah, for the sake of moving on, I'll just add a comment in later when we talk about Site 3 then. So we'll proceed forward to the treatment system. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. And then I just want to let Mr. Grice know that we do see your question in there since it's not directly related to the Site 3. We will pick that up at the end. Right now, we will move on to our interim stormwater treatment system update with Doug from Burrs Weston Services. Take it away, Doug.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Thanks, everyone. Good evening, Doug Close with Burrs Weston, interim stormwater treatment system project manager. Next slide, please. We met last July and we started to talk about, can I go to the next slide? We started to talk about the layout for the new filtration systems. We gave you a quick briefing because we were only a couple weeks into the addition of a new sand filtration skid and additional pre-treatment. Here is a little bit of a photo or a capture of our layout at the point of the weir structure and behind the rec pond berm. Next slide, please. This slide shows, next slide, please. I'm trying to get to the next slide that shows the internal.
I think we might be having a couple of technical difficulties. Let me check into that just a moment.
There we go. Well, sort of. I can work with this. There we go. So the site layout. If we start at the right-hand side of the page or the 3 o'clock position, we added in a new sand filter container. That container includes 5 skids of coarse and fine sand that really helps with the removal and the separation of the solids that we were struggling with in the early adaptation of our system. Moving around to the left-hand side, we go into pre-treatment structure and control panel. That's where our electric is received. This is where we filter the next part of the processed water through bags. Once it leaves the bag filtration, it goes through the internal piping into our 2 treatment containers. and those containers are what hold our media, both carbon and resin. Next slide, please. A more thorough skeleton shot of this system, if you will. If the pump is in the upper left corner, the raw water is taken in, it goes into a acid addition, the biocontrol portion of our system, goes through a separator and then down through the sand filtration within the container. That water is moved over into the pretreatment container where our bag filter housing is. Once it's gone through bag filtration, we get into our media treatment. And you can see how each container is aligned with 2 trains each with carbon, resin, resin. Next slide, please. So a couple reminders of timeline since the last meeting. We commissioned the system in late July. We started up with all new media. We put in new resin and new carbon, along with all new sands and our bag filtration system. The system was started on 13 July, and we're going to look at, next slide, please. We're going to look at a window of data from 13 July to 15th of September, roughly 65 days of operation. Of those 65 days, 50 of those days, we were successful in maintaining the pond drawdown, or the water being below the weir elevation and providing no bypass into Silver Stream. This accounted for 21 million gallons of rec pond water being treated and released as clean water down into Silver Stream. The levels of our PFOS and PFOA effluent were at 5 parts per trillion or lower, and predominantly in the non-detect situation. Next slide. This is a chart, a little bit easier to look at. On the left-hand side, you can see our influent levels of PFOS, PFOA as they come in from the raw pond water. And as they've gone through our complete pre-treatment and final media treatment, and these are the results in the effluent level on the right. Next slide, please. 4 events occurred during that period of performance where rain events were the significant factor in why we didn't maintain the drawdown. You can see a very steep spike in number or letter A. Some of you will remember the tropical storm that came through the Newburgh area. That's what that's a function of. We also lost some power in the entire community for up to 55 hours, and that was a big part of taking some time to get it drawn back down. But as you go across the board, the B event was just over a ½ inch or right at a ½ inch. So we just crested over the weir. We recaptured that and continued with the drawdown, as well as events C and D were over the 1/2 inch threshold that we're monitoring. And it took, just the 24 to 48 hours to recapture in some of those events. Next slide, please. For a comparison, you would look at the left-hand side photo. This is a typical working scenario for us during drawdown. This would be, about a 1 foot drawdown at the entire elevation of the pond water with no discharge, where the right-hand side would be a rain event exceeding a ½ inch and, regaining the elevation that we had captured in drawdown and overtopping the weir. Next slide. This is a more dramatic look at typical drawdown on the left and significant rainfall in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 inch of rainfall in a 24-hour period. you can see how the entire rec pond area is flooded, and this is a storm when we were seeing in excess of 100,000 gallons going over the weir. Next slide, please. Some of the operational challenges, we wanted to give you a couple pictures because we had mentioned our efforts during the summer to combat algae and pondweed growth at Rec Pond. On the left-hand side, if your picture is tuned in, you can see the very green layer of algae growth at the subsurface level. That's an impact for us in both sediment intake and biofouling, as well as on the right-hand side, you can see the pondweed. It grows. This is early in the summer. We didn't have a problem at our intake pump, but we were managing that and considering some options to remove the pondweed, but we were able to work around that. Next slide, please. Total organic compound continues to be one of the water quality indicators that we can look at along with turbidity on a daily basis, where we can do our very best to combat that through our pre-filtration. This is where we made some strides in getting this number down to an acceptable level, because in the first startup, we were well impacted by the TOC in our resin materials. So we are concentrating on that on a regular basis. You can take a look at what the average is as it comes down. And I think it's important to note that at the GAC, which is your carbon, it takes about 50% of that TOC number down. And that's pretty significant because we want to get it down to below 2 to protect that resin, which is your ultimate polisher for the PFOS, PFOA constituents. Next slide, please. Another visual graph, really turbidity. We talked about that. You can see the blue is your influent turbidity. That's your raw water, what we're measuring as we pump it into our system. And then the turbidity as it goes through our filtration system is the lower brown bar. Next slide. We talked about turbidity and its units of measure last time. During phase 1, which was we are a smaller scale system that we were provided the opportunity, our turbidity was averaging at about 3.4 NTUs. The phase 2, which was the summer, which we can contribute to the algae growth and the other bio growth in the pond that we saw in the photos, it was up to 3 times higher. So, you know, really a big part of our filtration is to manage that sediment and NTU level. It requires us to do, you know, constant maintenance and controlling of the system through backwashing. Next slide, please. So biofouling control is the accumulation of microorganisms on our wetted surfaces. We addressed 2 options for chemical additions to be considered to address biofouling. An algicide was considered early in the summer. It's an in-pond application that would have killed the weeds and algae that you saw in the photos. Through working with our stakeholders, the landowners, and yourselves, we considered to use other options. We did not go forward with an in-pond application of an algicide. What we did do was work closely with DEC to apply a 15% peracetic acid at a regulated rate of about 0.75 gallons per day when we're operating at 500 GPM. That application is being monitored. The low dose isn't eliminating the biofouling, but we're continuing to monitor to see if there is an effect from that allowable dose. Next slide. quick look of what the inside of the sand filter. This is a typical sand filter skid. When I say skid, you have two vessels side by side. The metering pump is the small pump that pulls from a 5-gallon storage can and applies the peracetic acid in a regulated dose. Next slide. Sand filters have been really a big step forward for us. We equipped the skids inside of the new container. When we run the system, your downflow regime is top to bottom. So the water's coming in through the top of your vessels. The sands are knocking down the sedimentation. Part of our operational maintenance for those sand filters are backwashing, where we reverse the flow. That flow goes back up through the column of sand and takes out the sediment. We divert that back through a discharge line. And during this phase, we've been really mindful of our backwashing. We've actually automated the system, and it is operated at any of our variable flow rates, and we're doing backwashes on those sands 3 to 4 times per day. Next slide. A real quick, what is that? It is biofouling that's inside our sand vessel containers. It usually comes in more as a microscopic, smaller egg, if you will, but we'll see live growth inside of our vessels. So is the dosing working to kill it? No. Is our system being shut down because of it? No. We're still running. The filtration is working. We're focused on the sedimentation. We continue to monitor the biogrowth that happens within our system, but we're operating and dealing with it through filtration. Next slide. The bag filters is another part of our step process for filtration. We have a primary bag filter and a secondary bag filter with 2 individual setups. We alternate different cloth materials with different micron sizes to maintain good filtration, but also maintain our pressure buildup, allowing our system to run. During the heaviest of growth and sedimentation in the summer, we used a combination of 10 micron bags and a 25 micron bag in the lead position. Next slide. This is kind of a photo of what's going on inside the bag filtration. On the left-hand side, those are the steel cylinders that fit in the center photo. Within those steel cylinders are our cloth bag filters. You can see how we pick up both sedimentation and live growth. That's, those are organisms that are getting into and being, taken out there by our bag filters. You can also notice in the center photo that we've got a pretty significant green tint from the algae. I think these were taken in like August. Next slide. Treatment trains, of course, is our final phase of treatment. Pressure is monitored to confirm when we need maintenance. Solids are accumulating in the vessels, but we are able to utilize a backwashing system, much like our sand filters in our carbon vessels. When we start off with new media, we slowly go into it, but as the system runs on a 24/7, we're now into a 2 to 3 times a week to maintain those carbon vessels. We don't backwash the resin. We try not to. It's not recommended. So it's really important that the carbon is a big, heavy, takes the load of all our sedimentation, and we do most of our backwashing through our carbon vessels. Next slide. So the results from some of our resin samples and our effluent samples taken during late September triggered us into our mitigation plan, where the media change is put into play when we're at our 35 parts per trillion breakthrough at our lead or center vessels. So we saw that in early September. By September 10th, we confirmed it through validating the data. We quickly moved into action to start scheduling media changes. And we did so with a primary resin vessel being replaced. I'm going to show you on the diagram, but what we want to take away from this in the September media change was we saw how effective the carbon is in reducing our TOCs and ultimately protecting our resin. So we wanted to incorporate more carbon to address the organics in the water. We didn't want to rely on chemical. So we're using that now going forward where we're piloting 2 vessels of carbon with a polishing of resin to be a more effective removal of the PFAS and PFOA. Next slide, please. So here's what we've done. We've highlighted it in a bar. We realized that the resin was not an effective media as the majority media to deal with all of the turbidity, the TOCs, and the solids loading in our system. So we replaced that second vessel with more carbon, and that's taking the load of both PFAS removal, organic removal, sedimentation collection, and ultimately protecting that resin vessel, which is your real polisher and knocking down your PFAS before discharge. Next slide, please. So we've been moving beyond since September 15th. You know, we're still a month later. We're still effectively pumping. The system is still averaging right around the same, over 75% of drawdown during the period. We did experience more rain events. We continue to monitor our chemical addition with our peracetic acid. We're evaluating now the performance of the 2 carbon vessels, substituting the primary resin. We find that it gives us a much more maintenance-friendly approach to protecting ultimately the final resin bay. And we continue to optimize the system through what we're learning now that we're operating on a regular basis. I think that's it for my slides. And we can take any questions.
This is Bill Fetter. Could I ask a few questions?
Sure, sir.
Sure. Does the pond have capacity where the spillway could be battered to increase the capacity of the pond, or is it the integrity not known? Could you increase the capacity of the pond to hold some more rainwater, more than half an inch?
We looked at that originally, and I think you probably stated it best. The integrity of that berm and how the weir is constructed. It's
Right.
not constructed as a dam.
Understood.
Yep.
Understood. Okay. And what is the fate of the backwash when you wash the different components?
If you reference the early diagram, it goes back into the pond behind the turbidity barrier.
Okay, so you're just
We're
kind of-
recycling it. Yeah.
yeah, but you're adding to your, well, it's less waste, agreed. Any schedule of scaling up a little bit, or are you going to refine this first before you move on?
We really like the opportunity we've been given to refine this. I think you heard me talk about the shift to go to the carbon. It's
Right.
more, heavy on allowing us to deal with the sediment. The sediment is a real challenge out at RAC Pond.
Understood.
Velocity of discharge from the outfall or algae growing. It's a shallow pond and it doesn't take much to bring in.
Turn it over,
sediment.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a date in mind to think about scaling up? What's your target now to evaluate what you're doing? I guess schedule, long-term, next quarter?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, well, some of that might be out of my pay grade, but we'll be running the system for Stewart and the ANG through the year until September. Things that happen between now and then, you know, that would be for some others to maybe address.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Heather, I think you're muted.
Heather, you're on mute.
No? Oh my. So sorry about that. I believe there was a message or a question from John Clark.
Hi, thank you. Did you do any short chain polyfluorinated compound testing before and after filtration?
No.
Okay. And then are there any other RAC members, since we have a few moments left with additional questions? Jack, did you have another question? I saw your hand up. I do see Karen Johnson.
You know, I want to go back. I want to go back.
Oh, sorry.
I'm looking at my notes and I think it was Bill that asked the question or the last question. Short change PFAS compounds were sampled. Both before and after filtration.
Thanks, that was John.
Sorry, John.
Is the filtration as successful for the short chain as the long?
As far as our working parameters, yes.
The question came to my mind when you showed the before and after graphs, and I mean, obviously you have the chemicals that you tested for specifically, but I wasn't sure what specifically was being represented there, if the short ones were just the PFOA and PFOS.
So
Okay.
Doug, I can talk to that. I think in the graph we just specifically mentioned the PFOA and PFOS, but we are following the EPA modified method 537.1 as required by the New York DEC.
Would you be able to point us to, in the final report, is there an appendix that includes a list of those PFAS that were tested for? That's great to hear. It took out short chain as well.
So for the interim stormwater treatment system, we don't have a final report quite yet, and we won't until after we're finished with the entire project. So we have been releasing interim tech memos that does have sample results. I want to say the last one was tech memo 2. Doug, you can jump in if I'm incorrect, but that has all of the data and all of the method up through the pilot study. We're still working on the startup memo that we will be releasing.
Got it. Thank you.
So thank you. It does look like our time is up for the 5 minutes of questions. It looks like some of you are adding questions into our question module, so please continue to add those so that we can address them during the public comment period at the end. So we will kind of move on because I definitely want to make sure we have enough time for our RAC Open discussion. We just got those slides from our community members today. So thank you guys for putting this all together. I know it was a lot of work. If we can switch over to that presentation now, Gretchen, for the community slide. And then I will turn it over to Chuck, Mary, Bill, and John, who I believe will be our presenters tonight. So thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is John Clark. I am grateful to be able to participate in this effort. And as part of how I view my responsibility as a community member, I have been trying to understand what the process is, what the problem is, and I've been trying to come up with better questions and a better way to represent what I've learned to the communities that I guess intersect with. I'm not a representative of sorts, but I'm a active member in the community. So I attempted to make some visual tools to share that, and to come up with some language that that can make sense to a non kind of technical vocabulary person. So not to make light of the situation or belittle it, but just to try to make it understandable. So next slide, please. So the magic number. What magic number are we applying to our communities? In reading through the site investigations, the expanded site investigation, there are a lot of numbers and technical terms that are thrown at us. So I'm more of a visual person and understand that we need to use language that is more recognizable. And I can't come up with a better term than the magic number. So the United States EPA defines a maximum contamination level on their webpage. And they also assigned a maximum contamination level goal. The MCL, or the magic number, is what is enforceable according to the United States EPA. Our state has just recently passed legislation to make that magic number 10 parts per trillion. There are many references in the extended site investigation that reference like an SL. I don't quite remember what SL, sample limit or something, sample level, but
screening level.
Screening level, thank you. It's kind of nevertheless a magic number to most people. We don't really understand until you really dig in and wrestle with the terminology, and none of us will spend as much time as the professionals who are involved with this. So so it's not clear that the magic number is related to medical studies. And there have been some medical studies, very large scale medical studies associated with PFAS. And the EPA says that the goals are, or the MCLs are set as close to the goals as feasible using the best available treatment technology and taking cost into consideration. So that doesn't sound like it is strictly related to personal health or effects on health. And it drives the question, what is the cost consideration for polluting my body or another member of our community's body? And I recognize that there's not necessarily a specific answer, and that sometimes our hands are tied based on regulation or litigation as to how we can process this. But my hope is that we can capture some of our learning in these slides and continue to present them to possibly communicate who the responsible organizations are, who makes the decision, what the limits are, in an understandable way. So one of the outstanding questions in my head after reading the expanded site investigation was, what magic number is going to be the deciding factor for a migration pathway, for a receptor? Is it just drinking water? It's not clear, and I hope as it becomes clear, I can continue to share that information. Next slide, please. So the Orange County has created several useful maps, and so just taking snips off of their maps, I created this graphic, or this infographic here, that shows, you know, the approximate location of the base and where the spill or the use of the chemicals have happened. And the red lines represent the waterways, those migration pathways on the surface. They don't represent groundwater. But this kind of shows the extent of what I am aware of, and I'm hoping to continue to improve these so that we capture what we do know. I really am not aware of what is, if anything, is affected north of the base. I know that some levels have been detected. Next slide, please. So those migration pathways, they typically look like surface water and groundwater, and both are recognized in the site investigation. And a receptor is like the receptacle. It's where the chemicals seem to be accumulated. And I believe specifically drinking water is an emphasis. And we've shown levels in Lake Washington, Browns Pond, the Crow Well, the Butterhill Wells in New Windsor. And there was reference to private wells around the Beaver Dam Lake area. These are all drinking water, but what hasn't really been addressed or acknowledged is the food chain that the chemicals are going into, and eventually we will all become receptors of the chemicals in our environment. And so this graphic is an attempt to represent what the places that we know of that are of concern, and that it's not just a Lake Washington and City of Newburgh concern, that this is a concern of the multiple communities around us. And a lot of people in the community feel that that this is being minimized by saying it is just a City of Newburgh problem because it's only our water source that is affected by it. So next slide, please. So what criteria and where? Again, back to the magic number, and this is kind of what I was describing earlier. What is the magic number for all of the different aspects? There was language as to say there's some insignificant contributors without any reference to how they determine significance. One well along the entire, I guess, shore of Lake Washington doesn't quite represent the groundwater contribution to the lake. And there is a specific calculation done in the expanded site investigation that shows flux of chemical through the groundwater into the lake, a contribution. And I feel it can be done similarly to Lake Washington. We don't hear much about short chain chemicals, and we know that polyfluorinated organic compounds, carbon chain chemicals will accumulate in our bodies. Next slide, please. Big question is who's paying? Who's going to pay for the clean water? This is specifically about utility cost and cost to the community members, and cost to the state, cost to our municipality. Who pays for the cleanup? There was some question about the National Defense Authorization Acts and the different acronyms that are thrown out there for government spending or memos and such. It's kind of not intelligible to people unless they're really involved, and we'd like to be able to just say these people are paying for it, or these people are not paying for it because it hasn't been approved by a legislative body. And we would just like to help make that clear so that people can appeal to the right folks to try to make this a priority. The last one there, who pays for poor health? There's a lot of different ways you can represent that question. Most of the folks who are affected would say that they are paying with poor health. Next slide. And I will pass it off to Mary.
Thank you, John. That was a great overview. And what John was alluding to is we are obviously not the only community with this type of PFAS pollution. I know Jack or Bill can probably share the number of sites across the country that are dealing with this, but we are fighting for a limited pool of funds. Ideally, all communities that have contaminated drinking water would be cleaned up. But we want to know how we will be scored, and this is the relative risk site evaluation strategy or scoring process that was mentioned before. So Nicole, it was great to hear that we wouldn't be penalized for having a temporary clean water source. So it looks like you did answer that question, and I welcome any other RAC community members to step in as well. And I know we have limited time, so I just want to make a note that these slides are available on our website, newburghcleanwaterproject.org, under the RAC tab. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these are different sample ranking sheets, and as you can see in the lower left, this groundwater worksheet, you see in the orange the migration pathway and the receptor factors. So those are some of the things that will be scored on that John was illustrating in his maps. Next slide, please. So here, for those new to the situation, this is kind of a real bird's eye view of the different spills that we've had over the few decades, starting in 1990. You'll see in the right lower hand, 4,000 gallons from the air base, and then we also have spills from the airport as well, as well as testing areas and a fire. Next slide, please. So the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, the regulatory body, did determine that the air base was the primary source of the pollution in our water. Next slide, please. And this shows you, if you see in the yellow, we have the airport and the air base, Stewart Air National Guard Air Base, Sang. That's if this was a topographical map, this is the highest point of our land. So these two pollution sources the contaminants run down the hill from there. And as you can see, that's where Washington Lake is towards the bottom, and then Browns Pond towards the very bottom of the screen. That's our backup reservoir. For all Newburgh residents on the call, we do have clean water right now coming through Catskill Aqueduct. Again, this is a temporary water source that the New York State actually pays for, or our city pays first, and then the state reimburses us. So there is some concern there. You know, we all know with COVID, the state is its budget is very impacted. How long will our access to that water supply last? And so that's our sense of urgency right now, that we need a working interim filter system that works above a ½ inch rainfall event. So let's see here. And, you know, we do have, our city does have a water granular activated carbon filtration system. Unfortunately, it doesn't take out all those short chain PFAS chemicals that John was asking about and speaking to. Next slide, please. These are Orange County maps. These are more snapshots. As you can see, the soil and water contamination, the highlighted yellow areas, so on the left, these are for PFAS, the main contaminant we've been looking at. So that PFAS is one of 5,000 PFAS chemicals. We know of 12 that have entered into our drinking water, or into our Washington Lake, our reservoir. So you can see that's a little lower left, 5,620. I believe that's parts per trillion. And that is for soil is on the left, and then on the right is a water contaminate, you know, different outfalls with the levels of PFAS contamination in the water. From the DEC report, the REC pond sediment, so REC pond is body of water that's before, you know, in our watershed. Our water comes through that and flows through various bodies into Washington Lake, and sediment samples there range from 2,140 parts per trillion to 424,000 parts per trillion. So significant. Next slide, please. And then we also have to look at what other sources of pollution. Right now, the Port Authority is not at the table, but as you can see there, and I think this might have been related to the spill, but in the lower left, again, the highlighted number, that's almost 2 million parts per trillion of PFAS. And correct me, anybody, if I'm reading these numbers wrong. Next slide, please. So body contamination, what are we talking about? So the New York Department of Health, in their first round of biomonitoring, we had almost 4,000 people tested, but of those participants, the people who were on the City of Newburgh water, so presumably Newburgh residents, 1,917 people were tested, and we don't know how long they've been living in the city and exposed to the chemical. But as you can see here are those people, their rates, their accumulation in their body of these 3 contaminants is higher than the national average. So PFOA is 2 times higher, PFAS 3 times, and this one that we haven't heard much about, PFHXS, is 7 times. Next slide, please. And then if we dig in a little bit more to that, we can see that, so of these nearly 2,000 people, so our national average is 5.20 and 18.5. Sorry, this is a little dense. If you go to the next slide, I can show you the numbers. So 91% of our city residents tested above the national average for the 50th percentile of PFAS. 53% of our city residents were very high. So they were in the 95th percentile, 53% above national average. Next slide, please. So we have just 1 minute left. So I want to, many of you may be familiar with these health risks, and you can learn more on our website, but they're obviously very concerning. And this is on top of residents that have already been, our city water department is doing a great job. But as you know, our city is old and it has lead service pipes as well. So people have been exposed to lead, PFAS, excuse me, and PCBs in the river. So this is an environmental justice community, and we obviously, our site needs to be made priority for cleanup. Next slide, please. This is a testimonial from Cynthia Mack, who is a former RAC member and works in the school system. Her own son died of cancer. She lived across the air base. Another child there has come down with a rare cancer, and she's testified that countless students are currently battling childhood cancer, and others are experiencing neurological and immune deficiency. So this needs to be looked at. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to stop there. You can find our slides again on our website, and I just wanted to pass it over to Bill. Thanks for your time.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me out there?
Yes, we can.
We can,
Oh.
Bill. And I just wanted to say really quick, just for time, I definitely want to give you the time to talk to your slides, but if you can be as brief as possible so that we can move on to our next section, I would appreciate it.
We don't need to talk through the slides. People can look at them at their own. The technical comments have been submitted. So just a couple of expanded questions. So don't worry about the slides at this point, really. People can read it at they're more technical and informative, I think. A couple of things though, in the long-term monitoring report on in section 4, you talk about the particular components have affected groundwater quality. I think that should be a little more clear and say negatively impacted at a minimum, if not worse. I think it's a little too buffered to say affected, which is in your purview. But back to section 3.6 and some of the graphs, looking at long-term monitoring, minimum contaminant, minimum MDLs, you changed midstream, or somebody did mid-course on the MDLs for certain parameters. The MDLs were raised, and I was wondering why that was done, why you would change methods if we're looking for these compounds and you're going to what appears to be a less sensitive analytical type. I don't know if you have an answer to that at this point or not, but just a query. I'm sorry I didn't note the graph. Been working my stuff way through these things for a couple of days. Back over to the landfill, and not the landfill, but the airport. During the camera work that you did, thousands of feet, you said that were done. Was there a reason not to chase suspect drainage in the dry weather when you said you detected wet flow in dry weather conditions? It doesn't look like any laterals were chased down during the camera work based on the graph that was provided in the report. It looks like you just did the perimeter around the apron with many spots that are sagging and open, and that's pretty good to see. I don't know if there's an answer for that. I'll stop anytime anybody wants to have some input here, or if you want to wait till it's all done. There's an analysis in loading, leaving the detention pond, REC pond. I think you used 400 grams per minute. And Terry, you've got to correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't want to carry this too far. Of PFAS, PFOA going over the spillway, I guess. 400. Yeah, I think it was grams per minute. I'm hoping it's not gallons per minute now, because otherwise, no, it had to be grams per minute. That translates into 1,200 pounds a day. I don't know if that was just a model that you ran, or if that's based on actual numbers, results. If there's 1,200 pounds a day spilling over that dam, it has to be found pretty quick. And if I'm wrong, you need to correct me right now so it doesn't go any further. And with that, I think I've said too much. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. And really quick, Carrie, I don't know if you were paying attention to that last questions about that Bill had, if it was grams or gallons going over the weir. Do you have a quick answer for that?
That sounds on the high side, as Bill suspected. If Nicole and I have agreed that we would certainly want to see any of these questions, and they're very, very good and relevant questions, Bill, but we'd like to see those, via email or however you could convey those to you. I will again quickly answer your question regarding the method detection limit. No one chooses the method detection limit. The method detection limit is set up in the laboratory for the instrument. The method detection limit is below the actual reporting level of the detection limit, which again is well below the standard set by the state or government entity. So the method detection limit, again, not a chemist, not a lab person, but the basic cursory setup is to set up an MDL that will then in turn give the laboratory the ability to see whether or not it's below or above the reporting limit, which again is well below the standard that they're working with.
Okay, I didn't get a chance to look at the actual lab reports to see that if methods were changed. I thought that perhaps a less expensive method was employed to save money for other efforts.
The method,
same method for 20 years.
Right. Oh yeah. So the method is agreed upon in the plan, in the sampling and analytical plan, which is reviewed by the state, which everyone signs off on and agrees to. There is no variation there.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you. I think the rest of my comments, questions are clear in the paperwork. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. And I think we have all of the questions. We'll just confirm that those are it. I would like at this point to move on to our public question and comment period so that we have those 20 minutes to address those. Again, if you would please submit those questions into the question module, we will address as many as we can get to tonight. If we cannot address all of the questions, we will be downloading them and responding to the questions in a written form after the meeting. There will also be an opportunity, we'll put the slide up in a minute, if there are questions that come up after the meeting. Mary has been so wonderful as to collect those for the RAC and submit them to us. So hopefully she'll be willing to do that again for this meeting. We really appreciate it. So please continue sending those questions. So first up, Anthony Grace, I want you to know we did not lose track of your question, and you will be the first one up. I see your question is, does that mean that Washington Lake will be back on the list for remediation next year? And I think, Nicole, that question is for you or Keith.
So I'll take that and say I'm uncertain by the question. So remediating Washington Lake itself would not be up. That again will the process to address the contamination and clean up the contamination is farther down the road as we work through the CERCLA process through the remedial investigation and the feasibility study. But I believe where that question may be coming from is because it came in, I think, right after I was talking about that slide we inserted about the remedial investigation and when that will happen. And again, I want to say that the purpose of that slide was to say that the RRSE process considers the original drinking water source, and therefore the community is not penalized for choosing an alternative source. But our evaluations of RRSE are ongoing. The Air National Guard is using this process to assess all of our installations where SIs have been completed for PFAS and PFOA. And as we develop information, we will be able to share it with you. But at this time, we cannot say which installations will have RIs executed in FY21.
Thank you, Nicole. And then Councilman Grice, I have unmuted you. Did you have any other questions related to that?
Am I unmuted?
You are?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So that was part of it. It was really based on that article because, you know, if there was an opportunity for Washington, well, not Washington Lake, for RAC Pond to be remediated, you know, that would be preferable, especially if it was next year. While we do understand that there is a process to it, you know, that one gave us some immediate concern. And so, you know, I think that John and Mary really spoke well to the sense of urgency that we have for Washington Lake, and not just for Washington Lake, but for the whole surrounding area. So that was that. And then my other question, while I have the microphone, was on the interim filter that's at RAC Pond. Why is that interim? Why, you know, if it seems to be working fairly decently or better than the first one, you know, why can't that just keep continuing?
Robert, are you going to take that one, or?
Yeah, sure, I'll take that one. So yeah, it's interim. So it was put in before the site inspection was complete, obviously before the remedial investigation. So it's not the ultimate solution for cleaning up PFAS at Stewart Air National Guard base. It's a interim solution to kind of say hold us over to do something to mitigate PFAS impacts for a point in time. But as you know, it's been discussed, it's not capturing everything. There's bypass, so that's why it's an interim solution until a more I guess well-developed, full-blown solution can be implemented. Does that help?
Yes.
So, all right. Thank you. So at this point, I would like to move on and make sure we get to some other questions in the question module. The next one is from Rick Schroyer. Could the Air National Guard please provide historical trend graphs for the groundwater compounds of concern reported above limits and the landfill gas concentrations for Site 3?
So, Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I know there are those types of historical graphs in the long-term monitoring report that go all the way back to when long-term monitoring began. And so, Carrie, do those graphs speak to this question?
Yeah, sorry. The graphs or any of that background info, we'd have to pull together. I don't have that readily available, but yes, you're correct, Nicole.
Okay, so they're in the report that's currently being reviewed then by the RAC members. Okay. And that gives me an opportunity, by the way, that one comment that I had wanted to say earlier was that we did receive RAC member comments. Bill, thank you very much for your extensive comments on the Site 3 LTM report. We received those on the 19th of October, and we have prepared responses to those comments. However, the comment period is until, for stakeholders like RAC members, is till the 30th, and we were not sure if that was the complete set of RAC comments on the Site 3 report, because I think the way it came in, it said personal comments with your name. And so we will, you know, after the 30th, we will be responding with written responses, and it will cover all of the questions, Bill, that you have already submitted. And for those that are wondering in the future, we always put our responses to comments in an appendix in the back of the final report, just as I was referring to earlier on the expanded SI report. So we will respond back to the RAC on those specifically, but then they will get included into the report that is available to the public.
Thank you. Our next question is also from Rick Scheuer. He says the New York State DEC in October 2020 provided their updated PFAS guidelines. The guidelines require the analysis of 21 PFAS compounds. The presentation only discussed PFAS PFOA. Will the Air National Guard plan to comply with New York DEC's updated guidelines for reporting 21 PFAS compounds? I think it was a little bit addressed, but I didn't know if Nicole, Jessica, or anybody else wanted, maybe Robert wanted to comment on that.
I can address that. So we will be following DoD guidance as far as the analytical methods that are used. So 537.1 modified and the number of associated analytes with that. So when the remedial investigation starts, we will be following that policy.
Thank you. Also from Rick Scheuer, carbon is effective for PFOA and PFAS, but much less effective for short chain PFAS. The use of carbon for a second vessel replacing one resin will be misleading to the public. Please provide a full list of PFAS compounds analyzed. Does anyone want to comment on that?
So this is just the phrase. I think going through the entire full list on this call would be a little much. We can provide that in writing when we respond to the questions. You can Google the EPA 537.1 method or look at our tech memos and see the full list of analytes there.
And I'd like to follow up on that as well. So it is worth pointing out that so there was carbon, resin, resin. Now there's carbon, carbon, resin. So you still have the resin in place as the polishing round, stripping out the short chain PFAS. So there is still a resin vessel in place.
Thank you, Robert. Then we have quite a few questions coming in from Gina Calderon. And one is about the location of the administrative record. So Gretchen, who's running our slide deck, I'm going to ask you to go back to that administrative record slide. That slide at the very top does provide the location of the administrative record, the web link for that. So we will put that up on screen for you, Gina, to see. It might take a few minutes. So give us time, but I will move on to your next question. What will the final trigger level be for changing filter media, currently 35 parts per trillion, given that New York State has set maximum levels at 10 parts per trillion?
Yeah, sure. So I'll take that. So currently the trigger level for media change out is going to be at 35 parts per trillion. But that's in between the GAC and the resin. And then obviously it goes through the resin as well. So for us, the change out will continue to be 35, but the effluent, as we've seen, has been pretty much below 5 parts per trillion the entire time.
Thank you. The next question from, I believe it's from Camison Hollow. What will the final trigger level be for changing filter media, currently 35 parts per trillion, given that the New York State has set the maximum 10 parts per trillion? I think we just covered that, sorry. All right, Karen Johnson. Beaver Dam has tributaries coming directly from Moodna Creek, sorry about that, and the lake has a very high level phosphorus, and in the deep sections of the lake, there is an issue with oxygenation. What is being done about the pollutants still coming into our lake? Beaver Dam has tributaries coming directly from Moona Creek, and the lake has very high level, and in the deep sections of the lake, there's an issue with oxygenation. Sorry, I think that was in there twice. What is being done about the pollutants still coming into our lake?
So I can address that to just say that at this time in the site inspection and the expanded site inspection, we have been focusing on Lake Washington because that is where the drinking water source that REC Pond feeds into from Silver Stream. We, in the remedial investigation, will be doing a full nature and extent analysis to determine if there are other pathways that could be leading to the other drinking water sources that are being mentioned. But I want to make clear that that is only if we determine that there are ANG mission related activities that led to that contamination. So, you know, we've talked before about how this is a national problem and there are multiple sources of PFAS contamination. The purpose of our remedial investigation is to look at sources stemming from Stewart Air National Guard activities.
Thank you. And then our next question, and unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't know who this is from. How is disposal of media, the sand, bag filters, carbon, and resin being managed and disposed?
Got it. So yeah, I'll take that. So right now, as far as, let's see, sand, you know, the sand is being reused. Bag filters, I'll defer that one to Doug. And then on the spent media, so carbon and the spent resin from the, let's see, that was the end of, or beginning of September change out. I believe that went for incineration. Can you confirm that, Doug?
Get the mute button off. You're correct. The waste streams, the three primary waste streams, the bag filters, the carbon, the resin, are being sent to a incineration facility, Covanta, and we're using a location in the state of Indiana right now.
So thank you. Our next slide. Relative to testing, sorry, this one is from Dan Shapley. Relative to testing of the interim stormwater system and the screening levels used in the expanded site inspection, can you explain the rationale for use of the modified EPA method 537? EPA method 537 includes 18 PFAS, whereas the modified method includes only 6 PFAS. EPA has other validated methods that can effectively measure 29 PFAS, particularly when it comes to the efficacy of a filter and the fact that AFF firefighting foams have included various formulations over time with multiple PFAS. It is important to measure the greatest possible number of PFAS.
If no one else can take that, I can.
Go for it, Carrie.
So this question arises frequently, and what's going on in the commercial world versus what can go on in the world under Department of Defense are two different things. The Navy, among others, leads the way for the Department of Defense for the administration and screening of new methods as they come out. And simply put, these new methods have not met all of the testing standards as required under DoD. They may eventually, but that's the reason that I was provided a couple, 3 months ago when this came up.
All right, thank you. So our next question, and I think they're starting to get away from me a little bit. The treatment vessels installed by the city of actually, I don't know if that is a question. Sorry, moving on. This one is from Tamison Hollow. How transparent will the scoring process be? Will we be able to view our score or have input as a community? And for the record, I hate the idea of competing with other affected communities for resources to remediate our site and protect our residents.
So I can answer that. I believe that she is talking about the relative risk site evaluation process, and that is something that we will eventually brief to the RAC as far as specifically how that was completed for Stewart. We cannot say at this time exactly when that will happen, but it will happen at a RAC meeting.
Thank you. And this will be our last question. Again, we will be downloading and responding to the additional questions in our module. So if you have any final questions, please get them in. Our last question is coming from Rick Scheuer. The New York State DEC October 2020 PFAS guidance has 2 parts per trillion for water and 0.5 parts per billion for soil. Were these the reporting limits obtained by the laboratory?
I think I need either Carrie or Doug to speak to that. I don't know the specific reporting limits.
No, I do not. I'm not aware of what Doug's working under right now. The reporting limits that we worked under, our work is that which is, again, needs to match the EPA approved methodology.
Thanks, Carrie. Doug, do you have anything, or Jessica, anything to add? All right. Then I think that wraps up our 20 minutes for our comments. Thank you again to everyone who came and participated in tonight's meeting. As I just mentioned, we will be downloading the questions and providing written responses. You can also reach out to Mary and provide questions through, I believe it's November 15th, for our questions that can come in after the meeting. I would like to open it back up to either Colonel Kelly or Colonel Cook and to Chuck Thomas if they would like to make any closing comments before we end for the evening. Chuck, if you're talking, I think you're on mute.
I'd like to just, Chuck, are you talking?
I think you said go ahead, Colonel Cook.
Since Chuck is muted, I will just keep talking myself. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for their participation and their time this evening. I know there's a lot of things going on that compete for our valuable time, but this is critically important to us as a community and to us as the 105th Airlift Wing, and we want to do everything we can to continue to address it and push the issue forward as best we can. And thank you all, and best wishes for happy holidays. Thank you.
Chuck, I can't hear you if you are speaking. Well, while Chuck tries to figure out his technical difficulties, unfortunately, I will again remind everyone, please insert your questions or send them to Mary. Again, I would like to welcome our 2 new RAC members who will be starting in February at our first meeting of the new year. Again, that will be in February 2021. And then I would like to thank all of our members for their service here, and for outgoing members. We really, again, appreciate your time and comments. I thank everyone for being with us and spending the time. Thank you to Chuck for your service as our co-chair for the year. Did you figure out your technical difficulties, Chuck? Nope, it doesn't look like it.
Bravo,
I am
Chuck.
so
Thank
sorry
you.
about that. So, and thank you to our RAC community members for your presentation. I think these are definitely some topics that we will be picking up even at future meetings. And again, we look forward to receiving those comments on that draft final interim stormwater, or not the interim stormwater, on the long-term monitoring for Site 3. Any other questions from that presentation tonight? Please submit those along with your other questions so that we can make sure to respond to those questions. Have a good evening, and we'll see all of you, hopefully all of you, in February.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.